After establishing himself as Rookie of the Year in 1996, Jacques Villeneuve won the World Championship at his second attempt, emerging triumphant from that controversial final round in Spain. 1998 promised to be a good year for the Canadian, although he was already a critic of new rules that introduced narrow track cars on grooved tyres. But his season began at Bercy in France, where the kart event is always spectacular, always brim full with celebrity drivers, and as usual, the number one celebrity has to be the reigning Formula One world champion, Villeneuve, given an ecstatic welcome by the crowd. Plenty of other celebrities to cheer as Villeneuve set off in the lead of his first race. He was pursued by Gabriele Tarquini, Eric van der Poel and Emmanuel Collard, although it was Patrick Levari who was closest and pushing hardest. In fact, he was so close and pushing so hard that he pressured Villeneuve into making a rare mistake. And as the back end of Villeneuve's machine disappeared out of sight round the corner into the tunnel, it was already sweeping round in an unstoppable arc that ended with a classic karting spin, entangling not only the race leader, but his rival as well. They both got going again, but there was a problem with Villeneuve's machine. A trail of sparks gave away the source of the trouble, and though Villeneuve knew there was something wrong, he couldn't stop the kart making a terminal departure from the racetrack very swiftly indeed. It was a big impact, and he was lucky to be unhurt. But he was cheerfully unmoved by the whole thing, and as Emmanuel Collard took the flag ahead of Tarquini and Norberto Fontana, other heats included drivers like Jan Lammers and Alex Zanardi, and the competition was intense, though the final was won by Mika Salo ahead of Johnny Herbert. Villeneuve clearly in an off-duty moment and clearly enjoying the occasion almost as much as the spectators. But there was serious work ahead as all the teams began to unveil their new for 98 cars. Despite the new regulations, there was a widespread feeling among most designers that the aerodynamic package was much the same as it had been the previous season. Ironically, the narrower tyres introduced to reduce grip also reduced frontal area and therefore CD. Even on a modern saloon car, the tyres are the single most restrictive element in the airflow, and making them narrower is almost the same as giving the engine more horsepower. At Silverstone, on a bleak afternoon in February, Villeneuve began his title defence with a series of hard, impressive laps. The first new Formula One car of 1998 to be seen in public had been Ferrari's new F300, launched on a foggy Maranello morning against the stunning backdrop of Ferrari's new wind tunnel. It was still misty when the team arrived at Mugello to begin an exhaustive series of tests at the beautiful Tuscan racetrack owned by Ferrari. In privacy, if not actually complete secrecy, the team began working on the package which Jean Todt had publicly promised would win the World Championship or stand condemned as having failed. Initial reactions to the new car were very good. It immediately began setting good times, very good times, compared to last year's car, especially considering that the new rules, which reduced the track, made it around a hand's width narrower on either side of the cockpit, and established hard compound grooved tyres, all were intended to reduce speed. Most teams admitted the aero package had clawed back the greater percentage of the losses, though no one was being any more specific, and the times from the official tests in Barcelona gave Ferrari every reason to be pleased. But public declaration of its championship ambitions really had put the pressure on Michael Schumacher, who was likewise optimistic about the long-term prospects for himself and the car this coming season.
It's quite a nice car, I like it personally. It's, for me, more performance in that car and more development possibilities. And I think we're going to end up in a positive result. How positive it's going to be, I don't know.
You had a long distance run yesterday. Was that satisfying to you?
Yeah, there was no problem basically, and it was quite good.
Okay, what about your chances in for the World Championship this year?
I mean, our target is to drive for the championship, but then there's I think about 22 competitors. They want to do the same, so don't know where we're going to end up. For sure, we're going to be in the front somewhere, but whether we're going to win the championship or not, it's a total different piece of paper which can't be answered right now. There's too many question marks at the moment on tyres, regulation, and so on, which I can't foresee where is the end going to go.
This was the first new Ferrari for several years to be created entirely in Italy. And the team insisted that only close cooperation between engine and chassis designers could have created a new car this far ahead of its design objectives at the start of the season. And this from a team determined to improve on last year.
It's improved in all the right areas. The aerodynamics are as good, if not slightly better than last year's car, even though the rules have changed to slow us down a lot. The mechanical side of the car is much better than last year's car. The front suspension is a lot stiffer, the rear suspension is a lot stiffer. Car's a lot better put together. It's more reactive to change, but we won't know how quick it is until we go to Australia or Brazil and Argentina, and after like 2 or 3 races we'll know how we stand, because we've tested away from everyone else.
But long before they went to Melbourne, the McLaren had already revealed itself as dramatically quicker than anything else, and that included the Scarlet F300. After its unveiling at a medieval castle in Vienna, Sauber's C17 went quickly into the pre-season test routine, and while Ferrari were away testing on the long power-sapping curves of Mugello, the Sauber team was at the Fiorano test track owned by its engine supplier. While team owner Peter Sauber hopes one day to build his own engines, he realises that the technical competence to do so does not yet exist within his Swiss-based team. Tom Walkinshaw's Arrows team has just embarked upon that project, becoming only the second team in the Formula One pit lane to build its own engines. But there were a lot of Nissan people at the launch of the new Arrows, and it seems probable that the team does have a technical partner with considerable resources, and that's exactly what you need. In the meantime, Sauber continues a very successful relationship with Ferrari and uses a customer version of the Maranello V10. And that, of course, accounts for the team presence here at Fiorano and for the several Ferrari personnel in attendance. While things went well here at Fiorano and initially looked good once the team had moved on to the Barcelona test, at times were soon matched and then eclipsed by almost everyone else present. As the test days went by, Sauber slipped backwards on the cumulative timesheet, but in a way so did everyone else, as the pit lane viewed the partnership of McLaren, Adrian Newey and a brand new Ilmor Mercedes V10 with increasing dismay. When mere Mercedes-badged engines gave way to a fuller technical partnership with McLaren, many observers heralded the return of the Silver Arrows to the racing arena, and indeed, the colour scheme went some way to supporting that contention. But at the launch in 1997, Mercedes made it plain that no car could be considered as a Silver Arrow until it had won some races, which it did almost at once. Now, the 1998 season looked all set to add another chapter to the illustrious history of Germany's best-known motorsport ambassadors, a team with a racing pedigree that goes back even further than that of Ferrari. But until the European Grand Prix of 1997, Mika Häkkinen's 7-year Formula One career hadn't given him a single victory. The road to the top and a 6-year spell at McLaren most definitely is the top, began when Mika was just 6 years old, as he started racing karts like so many before him. A driver's next move is into small single-seaters. Mika entered Formula Vauxhall Lotus at the age of 22 and was European champion in 1988. He says his first season in Formula 3 in '89 was the start of his professional career, taking him to the Formula 3 race at the Monaco Grand Prix, and the following year he was British champion. The next step was into Formula 1, driving for Team Lotus in 1991 and 92, where he attracted the attention of many teams. But the real turning point came in 1993 when he cleverly accepted a role with McLaren as test driver. By the end of the season, he'd raced in 3 Grand Prix and has been the team's #1 driver ever since. Now, he started a season with a real hope of achieving much more than winning just one race.
And certainly after the race I had a very confusing time. I was really confused. I was not sure, did I win it or what? Until I saw black and white, that, all right, it has happened. And it made me really released. It made me really happy. It made me like, okay, it's done. I won the race, thank you very much. It didn't mean I can now sit down and say, okay, I won the Grand Prix, I can stop my career. It's not a question of that. But it made me to realize how easy it is. How easy it is to win, you know. And end of the day, last year I got the pole position once, I got fastest lap, I won the Grand Prix. So I have achieved all these goals now. So next one is the World Championship. And I'm sure it's a difficult thing. One day, maybe when we make an interview, you ask me what it feels like to be a world champion, and I said, well, it was easy. So hopefully that will happen. And so we'll see.
When the Williams team invited reigning world motorcycle champion Michael Doohan to drive a Formula 1 car at the Catalunya circuit, he had already won 46 Grand Prix in 8 years and the world crown 4 times. With reigning World Rally champion Tommy Mäkinen also due to take a drive, it was motorsport's equivalent of the 3 tenors. With more than 3 times the horsepower and almost 5 times the weight, a Formula 1 car doesn't ride the razor's edge the way a 500 Grand Prix bike does, but it's more than a handful for all but the very best. And confronted by it for the first time, even a world champion can feel like a novice.
You know, that feels real brave. That might be a bit there you go for a little while.
Though Doohan and Villeneuve come from different branches of motorsport, they were united here by their high-speed professionalism.
Back in. How are you? Yeah, not so bad. Congratulations on your last race. Thanks very much. Good on you. Cheers.
Normally reticent in front of the press, Doohan prefers to let action speak for him on the racetrack. But this is different. A day at the track, which meant he could also have a day off from work.
There's a huge amount of things in here that the driver can change. You can scroll through all of these, and that's power steering. At the moment, it's set at level 6 because we're going to check the systems out.
Well, yeah, you're here to play really, and you know, it's definitely nothing serious, and there's no long-term future in it for me. So just to have a drive was one thing that I'd always said to myself, I'd before I stopped racing, or when I stopped racing motorcycles, I'd really love to have a drive of an F1 car.
And that moment is now. When it arrived, Doohan drove very carefully out of the garage. He set off steadily down the pit lane, but cold tyres and the hair trigger response of the V10 were waiting for him to fall into the track which has called out plenty of the top drivers over the years, sparing neither the experienced nor the illustrious from embarrassment. And Doohan spun the FW19 coming out of the fourth turn of his first lap. It was only a brief setback, and the only damage inflicted was a light tap on one wheel.
No, it's like pointing it straight and he just spun. Like, as soon as I gassed it, it just started to spin, and as soon as I got out, it just kept going. And just tapped the wall with the left rear. That's cool.
I was too apprehensive, he said later, and worrying too much about what the others expected of me. If I'd been more relaxed about the power, I probably wouldn't have spun. He went back to the pit lane to start again and later did 8 more laps, the best of them 5 seconds quicker than his fastest race lap on his NSR in the previous year's Motorcycle Grand Prix.
The tyres are very cold because the pressures are actually dropping rather than coming up. That's why we've just put some more air in the front. All right, well, if you're happy, we'll go and do these last couple of laps and get you upstairs. All right.
When it was all over, Doohan said he'd been driving like he was going to the shop for a newspaper and some milk.
No, it's a lot of fun. It's hard to convince myself to go faster through a turn than what I'm used to, if you know what I mean. Yeah, definitely.
As Frank Williams vetoed a return match with Villeneuve on Doohan's 500, World Rally Champion Tommy Mäkinen took his seat in the FW19, also here to enjoy the sensation of Formula One power and speed.
Just didn't just hit the brakes, full clutch until you stop. That's why he hit the wall. He didn't hit the brakes and he rolled the wall. Because on a motorbike, when you fall, you just fly.
Okay. Full brake and clutch. It's brilliant. It's unbelievable. It's difficult to understand immediately what it is. It's so excellent. By acceleration and brakes, I could feel it. I think I braked still quite a lot too early after the main straight, but still you could really feel the brakes and then accelerate and grip everything. Unbelievable, good feeling in the first, after the first straight and to the long ride. Bit more, and I've got some feeling for the tires. And it was good feeling. And just forget this, because with the rally car, it's no question of that kind of problem. You can put the full throttle whenever you want.
On his opening lap, Mäkinen went 15 metres further than Doohan before he too fell victim to a predictable combination of cold tyres and premature acceleration out of the corner. However, he too went back to the task with the confidence of a champion. The pride had to come before a spectacular fall, and he spun again after missing a shift at 250 kilometres an hour. I made a stupid mistake, he said later. You can't go sideways, you have to follow the perfect line. Later on, Villeneuve demonstrated what it's like to be at home in the cockpit of a modern Formula One car. But for him too, this was just play. He was due to return to work at the Spanish Grand Prix in Jerez, where he'd won last year's crown. But this season, that kind of success was proving elusive for the defending world champion. Mäkinen and Coulthard blitzed the opening 2 races and looked to be running away with the title. The Ferrari team was working flat out behind the scenes, chasing to catch up, and they were catching up fast.
excellent wind tunnel facility. It's I would say it's probably the most up to date and the best in Formula One.
Aerodynamics is the increasingly complex science that dictates the shape of a Formula One car, and the application of aerodynamic requirement to the creation of a new car is an area in which all teams must learn to excel if they hope to sustain a leading role in the championship. And in order to do that, there is nowadays little or no alternative to the ownership of your own multi-million-dollar wind tunnel facility.
Wind tunnel development work is absolutely essential in Formula One, so every team does wind tunnel research. But the advantage of having your own tunnel as opposed to hiring a tunnel, A, is that you've got the use of it all the time. B, you can update the facility, you can make changes to the facility. In a nutshell, it gives you exclusivity, it gives you more research time in the tunnel because you've got a tunnel available full time. And obviously being on site means that the logistics are much easier.
Working on scale models is sometimes better than working on the real thing.
Well, the thing is, in the tunnel, it's like all experiments. You need constant conditions. You need a constant set of conditions in which to develop, and that's why we use the wind tunnel rather than a car. Because on the circuit, the wind changes, circuit temperature changes, so you're getting all sorts of changes that you can't control, and those really prevent you doing the sort of experiments we can do in the wind tunnel on the car, because we're looking for very small improvements. I mean, improvements of the order of 1%. Improvement in aerodynamic efficiency is a significant improvement, and it's quite difficult to get that level of repeatability on an experimented circuit on the car.
In the McLaren factory at Woking, the lights had been burning non-stop since Boxing Day, and in Maranello, the engineers were likewise flat out as their battle to excel in sport became more and more like war. Most wind tunnel buildings are squat, functional blockhouses. Ferrari's futuristic building is a reminder that to outsiders at least, the cars are things of beauty first and of function second.
It really is a magnificent feat of engineering, and quite frankly, the external view. I think this is probably the only wind tunnel I've ever seen that's got the part of the air side inclined at 45 degrees, and it is really striking in appearance. I mean, you can drive past probably the main road's probably half a kilometre away, and I find it is really striking.
By Monaco, round 6, Villeneuve had finished in the points 4 times, Frentzen 3. Both had 8 points, Häkkinen 46, Alexander Wurz had 9 and Fisichella 7. All was not well at Williams. Though McLaren were indeed running away with it all from the front, and all the teams were suffering, the defending champions were not even mounting a coherent defence of their crown. Away from the pressures of it all, Heinz-Harald Frentzen relaxed at home amid increasingly powerful rumours that his contract would not be renewed for next year. While Villeneuve was widely expected to leave of his own accord en route to BAR, Frentzen was expected to receive the Royal Order of the Boot, though his performances were not demonstrably worse than those of his teammates. The only option under those circumstances is to get away from the pressure.
Well, a few days we are here in Monaco. We try to relax. We try to relax from the races, and we are here only for 2-3 days maximum, and then we are on the road again, basically. But I have to say, it's not a bad place, to be honest.
After the Monaco Grand Prix came a 2-week break before the teams went to Canada, and in the interim, Williams completed work on a new long wheelbase car, which testing showed was a big improvement. A genuine step forward was how it was described. Both drivers were impressed with its improved handling, but knew they were going to the wrong place to reap the benefit. The circuit Gilles Villeneuve is all about power and not about handling. The situation wasn't improved as Villeneuve tried desperately to pass Fisichella in the race, but succeeded only in outbraking himself and dropping back to finish in 10th place. The next stop on the championship trail wasn't much more help, although Villeneuve added 3 points to his total, finishing in 4th place. The car was better, but seemed to lack pace, and neither driver was enjoying the season, although Villeneuve was occasionally seen to be driving it as hard as he knew how, and let's face it, he does know how.
Our car seems to be better than last year with low downforce, as we saw in Monza's testing. But on this track, you have a lot of slow-speed corners, chicanes, hairpins, and that's where we have our weakest point. We don't have a very good traction, so we could lose out a little bit in these slow-speed corners.
Silverstone and Austria provided little reward and fewer points for Williams. But by the time they got to Germany, things were indeed better, as they hoped. But they were still hoping for their first podium finish of the year.
Try hard anyway. We're trying very hard. We should be back on the podium. There's no question about that. And if we have a good weekend, if a weekend turns out like the one in Montreal, then we could get a win. We lost a good opportunity there. Hopefully there's going to be another one before the end of the season.
Germany provided the best result of the year so far for Villeneuve. The car looked competitive, and at last we saw flashes of the determination which was so impressive in his rookie season. But the weekend was far from satisfactory for Frentzen. No points for the 4th time this year, to go with 4 DNFs on his record card.
Habe ich noch eine Runde?
There was precious little joy for Jordan either, despite the fanfares and circuses at the launch of what many observers thought might be a make-or-break season for the popular team, still struggling to make it to the big league after 8 years. But this had been a particularly barren season, despite the hoped-for results that should have come from the combination of Honda, Hill and Shui 2. From the first 8 races, Ralf Schumacher collected 5 DNFs and 3 no scores. Damon Hill, 3 DNFs, 4 no scores and 1 disqualification. In Brazil, after the car was 7 kilos light in the post-race weigh-in, there would have been no point for his finishing position anyway. At first, Hill professed himself disappointed but not downhearted. The Mugen engine wasn't quite punchy enough, Goodyear were trailing Bridgestone in the tyre wars, and there was hope for the future. But though everyone put on a brave face, clearly all was not well. While EJ and Co played golf, Gary Anderson took extended leave while his new assistant, Tyrrell fugitive Mike Gascoigne, worked on the new car. Damon Hill maintained a very British stiff upper lip and quiet confidence throughout, and gradually the improvements began to filter through, and equally gradually they began to take noticeable effect. Hill looked a lot more relaxed as he arrived here at Goodwood's Festival of Speed. The circuit closed its doors in 1966, almost 20 years before Damon Hill won 32 races on 2 wheels, champion of brands on his Yamaha in 1984. Though this is the first time he's raced against former world champion Barry Sheene. He returns to bike racing where his career began, but this time for a guest outing on a 500cc single-cylinder Manx Norton, and is reunited with Formula One commentator Murray Walker, himself a bike enthusiast.
Damon Hill, who was in 17th position, has made up 4 places. He's now in 13th position. And look at the style of Damon Hill. Cool, calm and collected in a Formula One car, and looking completely at ease on a motorcycle.
and he acquitted himself well, finishing 10th in the race after being in the high teens. A good ride from him and deserving of congratulations from Barry Sheen, who was second, though the pair of them had to shout extra loud in the paddock as they were buzzed by a wartime Spitfire, all part of the Goodwood Festival's atmosphere.
Oh, it's beautiful. I've not really ridden anything like that before. I used to race TZ Yamaha, but yeah, that's a beautiful machine. I mean, it must have been really something to ride that around the Isle of Man.
I know you used to make models of those, you said, when you were younger.
I did. I made an exact that bike, you know, a model of that when I was younger, and they're beautiful machines to look at. To see Barry riding around in front of me on them, I was getting a real kick out of that. It was quite a lot.
Near Silverstone, Ralph Schumacher has come to the other kind of race course.
Did you raise on? I suppose we should have the option to put his full weight on. Tom. He's already weighed himself, so
I weighed myself. Yeah.
Look at the scales, Tom. Again.
Well, they're quite nice, those.
It's good. Yeah, I'll tell you what I would just want to show up. The quietest race horse we have there.
Race horse.
They didn't say go.
I really need a race horse.
They told me that's just what you want.
Oh yeah, that's quite wonderful.
And yes, believe it or not, he is. It's just, this is all unusual. You know, it's not... Give your leg, no, I'll let you off. Give us your leg, look, bend that, bend that leg, and I'll leg you straight up in the sun. Okay, up you go. Alright, 1, 2, up.
No, don't flex, okay?
Now Ralph prepared to deal with a completely different kind of horsepower, but it's one he's actually very accustomed to. He's no stranger to the sport of kings, and in his early teens he was a very keen show jumper. Indeed, he might easily have pursued a career on 4 legs as opposed to 4 wheels. Although you can't tell by looking, but the chance to ride again was an opportunity not to be missed.
Actually, I'm thinking about buying a new one again, but the problem is if you live in Monaco, you don't have the place for it. My apartment would look a bit strange, wouldn't it?
It must have been a welcome break from the pressures of a difficult season, but it could only be very brief before duty called. Things were looking better for Schumacher and for Jordan. And at Silverstone, Ralph scored the team's first point of the year, adding another 2 at the very next race in Austria. He scored a point in Germany too, as Hill broke his personal duck and finished 4th, only the second time this year that both the yellow cars had finished a race, and the first in which they both scored points. Metamorphosing out of the departing Tyrrell team, British American Racing took the wraps off their new factory in England's Formula One heartland. Armed with an undisclosed budget of considerable proportions, their 5-year campaign to win hearts and minds as well as races began with a press advertising campaign that coincided with the opening of its new facility near Oxford, a few miles from Benetton, Williams, Arrows, Jordan, Stewart and McLaren, and of course Reynard. Adrian Reynard's eponymous design and manufacturing base is all but next door, and under his leadership, Reynard's chief designer Malcolm Osler is drawing the car which will take to the track next season. Reynard himself began his motorsport involvement years ago, making drag bikes to run on the old US airfield at Elvington. Even today, he's a racer at heart, a designer by inclination and a businessman by necessity, so this new deal leaves him ideally suited to chase dreams as well as ambitions.
I was only 15 at the time, and I was fortunate enough in my local village to have a motorcycle racer called George Brown, who was prolific in breaking lots of world land speed records, and had been racing in the TT. And I went to work in his shop on Saturdays for nothing initially, and then for 10 shillings a day. and he got me interested in it. And I bought one of his old machines initially and started to race it when I was about 18, 19. And then the one you see down there, I built myself, and it was my first design and manufacture project when I was about 19.
With a record of immediate success in every formula it enters in its own name, Reynard hopes the move into Formula One will produce similar results. Make no mistake, and despite everything Jackie Stewart has said about taking 5 years to win a race, BAR is ambitious and hungry and planning to move a great deal faster.
It's the whole package which is incredibly difficult. We're racing, competing against the very best, the very most enthusiastic, most hardworking, the cleverest people in motor racing, and trying to beat them is a great challenge. Trying to stay in business is a great challenge, because it's not like having a washing machine where you can have the second most popular washing machine on the market and you still have a nice segment of the market and you still run a very profitable company. If we have the second best racing car, nobody wants to buy it. We can't sell it for any price. So we're very much determined to produce the very best machine. And if we can do that and keep our customers happy and service them and build a reputation, then our success is there. If we come second best, we're gone and we're out of business. And that's how difficult motor racing is.
As the other teams held fire on their agreement to allow Tyrrell to change its name to BAR next year, speculation over who would drive for the new team remained focused on Jacques Villeneuve, who came into Formula One with Craig Pollock and was generally believed to have a signed contract already in his pocket. In fact, that, said many, was the reason for his less than blistering performances in defence of a crowd which was now lost beyond any hope of salvation. Not true, insisted Jacques Villeneuve and Craig Pollock, although Villeneuve agreed that he was now talking to anyone who would listen about next year, which was taken to mean that he would not be driving for Williams. No decisions have been made, he insisted, although listening to Craig Pollock at the factory opening, you might be forgiven for believing the opposite to be true.
Well, I didn't really start dreaming. It was just a dream, an idea that I had literally one night. It happened on the night after Elkhart Lake in 1994 when Jacques Villeneuve won his first IndyCar race, and I started to realize, hey, this kid really does have the talent, and maybe one day he'll be up there. So if I go into Formula One, I will make the same mistakes as I made in IndyCar.
With the drivers unconfirmed, there was official confirmation about engines. They'll be called Supertech, which is the rebadged Mechachrome supplied through Flavio Briatore. Then Michael Schumacher re-signed for Ferrari at a salary large enough to keep a midfield team in engines, and the silly season was swiftly cut short. Unsurprisingly, the Villeneuve BAR announcement was made within days, so we could all guess who else he'd been talking to. In the centre of Modena, the small Italian town known worldwide for its most famous son, Piero Ferrari unveiled a statue created to commemorate the 100th anniversary of his father's birth on February the 18th, 1898. In the 100-year history of the motor car, only one name is better known than that of Enzo Ferrari, and that's only because children are taught about Henry Ford at school.
Perché voi tutti sapete, pensata non desidera parlare.
Ironically, Enzo Ferrari skipped most of his schooling and his formal education in order to work on racing cars, the legacy of visits to local racetracks with his father. By 1920, he was a works driver, campaigning Alfa Romeos alongside legendary drivers like Campari and Ascari, commemorated in the sculpture. Though he was a spirited performer on track, his true genius lay in organising and motivating others. Alpha recognised that very quickly, and by 1923 he was running the team from pit lane. The inevitable result that by 1929 he'd formed his own race team. Scuderia Ferrari made its first appearance in December that year, wearing the prancing horse insignia of the Italian Air Force squadron in which Enzo Ferrari's brother had served in the Great War. Fittingly, both Eddie Irvine and Michael Schumacher were on hand in Modena for the unveiling of the statue of Il Commendatore. So too was Ferrari president Luca di Montezemolo. All of them went on to a reception at the Galleria, the Ferrari museum that is a shrine to the man and his cars.
Well, for sure it's a special day because when you celebrate such a fantastic man, for me that now I sit in his chair, you feel more responsibility. But on the other side, I was lucky enough to work with him for 4 years, very successful here in the 70s. And I'm sure that from the sky, at the moment today, he's very pleased of his factory because Ferrari is living a very good moment in the road cars activity, and Ferrari is back again at the best level in Formula One too. So I think that we have to be pleased and happy.
Race legend Mario Andretti was also proud and happy to be here.
If you can see the ambiance is there. Everyone is so excited, to be part of it. It's an event that goes down in history. I think the city of Modena finally recognized their number one citizen in the best possible way with a monument which will be there forever. And Ferrari has such a rich past, but I think equally has just as strong a future.
That prediction was certainly coming true, though no one could have foreseen it in February, with McLaren dominating the tests and preparing for runaway success. But by July, there had been an astonishing Ferrari revival, and after Schumacher won 3 races on the trot in Canada, France and England, the mood at Maranello was jubilant as the team prepared to relive the glory years on which the Maranello legend was built. In the post-war years, the Ferrari name had grown to legendary status after success in every motorsport arena. But it was in the Formula One World Championship that Ferrari became a household name, and though in recent years the results have been harder to come by, Ferrari has always been the legend and always exerted that magnetic pull which brought the best drivers to its doors. Renowned as an autocratic genius, famed as one of the founding fathers of modern Formula One, and revered as the inspiration behind a vast range of cars known and recognised all over the world, Enzo Ferrari died in 1988. But his name and his legend continue to live and grow. The battle between Ferrari and McLaren was the story of the season. There was no one else in it, and Hockenheim had showed that the Mercedes engine was not invincible. Ferrari had horsepower and reliability, they had an improved car, and they were beginning to put pressure on a car which had looked to be the complete package, a perfect combination of engine, chassis and aerodynamics, which comes from close partnership between designers.
Obviously there is still an interface between car and engine, but
the package, I think, is to a degree developed together, because they're finding out from their aerodynamicists what is important, what is giving them a gain. And the next stage is how can we adapt the engine to get into that package best, or we find a benefit on the engine. And then the question is how can we adapt it into the car without compromising the car's aerodynamical performance.
Mercedes race engines are built at Ilmor, a massive place employing 200 people, bigger than most Formula One teams. While design, manufacture and NATO-grade quality control are vital elements of what goes on here, the most critical is research and development. With Mercedes as a partner, there's obviously a huge wealth of information and resources to draw on, as teams are already looking ahead to next-generation materials like ceramics, which might be used inside the engines.
You can use ceramics in some areas for reduced wear or reduced friction, that type of thing, but not to the degree people were talking about it. I think that was a little bit of more talking than actually what's happening in reality. But new materials for sure will come in, but I think they're more in materials, composite materials, fiber reinforced materials and that sort of thing.
The modern Formula One engine is an intrinsic part of the car. It's a stress member that becomes part of the chassis once it's bolted into place. Its size, weight and position will affect the nature of the car as a package, and as we've heard, it may not be long before engine designers sit side by side with chassis designers as a new car is created. After that comes the even trickier part, building engines that can produce 700 horsepower on demand and go on producing it on demand for the next 2 hours. Ilmor and Mercedes use production facilities so advanced that Ilmor now makes Formula One standard crankshafts in minutes, shortcutting a process that used to last months. The factory uses so much power that it needs its own electricity substation so as not to black out the industrial estate it's on and half of Northampton as well. The equipment and commitment, evident here, make it obvious why Mercedes and McLaren are happy to be involved. But even so, McLaren's take-up of around 70 engines in a season is massive. A two-car Formula One team absorbs as much effort and finished product as the entire IndyCar program at its height. Using all the latest CAD/CAM and so on, it takes Ilmor about 6 months to design and build a new engine from scratch to prototype, and about 2 weeks to make each one once the program is established. Ilmor do the lot from start to finish, buying very little apart from electrical components needed to assemble things like the £12,000 wiring loom for the fuel injection system. There are about £50,000 worth of electronic parts on the engine when it's complete and ready for dispatch back to McLaren, where it will be used as a race engine for Mika Häkkinen or perhaps even for his teammate David Coulthard. Which means that when it's put in its crate and leaves the factory, it has to be perfect or as near perfect as modern technology can make it. Coulthard and Häkkinen have been teammates for the past 2 years, though Coulthard's experience in Formula One goes back much further. In fact, he too started racing at a very early age, a strange choice of recreation for a young boy brought up in the countryside.
I think that in many ways, if I was to live in Manchester or Birmingham or something like this, although Birmingham obviously had a famous racing driver in Mansell who was very successful, but I think there's almost too many distractions there, too many other things that you could do.
At the start of this season, he and Häkkinen both stood an equal chance of the Drivers' Championship. But David Coulthard's gentlemanly willingness to stick to his pre-race agreement in Australia swung the balance in Mika Häkkinen's favour, and it has never really swung back again.
I love RM. Who's RM?
Like Mika Häkkinen, Coulthard began racing in karts when he was 11 and started winning almost at once. With 5 Scottish titles and the British as well, he switched to Formula Ford and impressed a lot of interested people. In 1990, still a teenager, he joined Paul Stewart Racing to drive in Vauxhall Lotus and collected a McLaren-sponsored Young Driver Award and a McLaren Test Drive, which did him no harm at all.
I started karting when I was 11 years old, and that was because my father had an interest in karts. He used to race karts when he was younger, and he'd sponsored some other Scottish guys racing karts before I was old enough. I used to go to the races, showed an interest, had a go on one round the garage, started racing.
But you have to have Formula 3 on your CV, and Coulthard excelled. British runner-up in 91, he got noticed by winning at Zandvoort and Macau, both extreme tests of skill. From Formula 3000 to a Williams Test Drive was next, but his career received its biggest boost when he stepped into the seat of the Williams after Senna's crash at Imola.
Scottish flag on there, of course. A little DC on the back so that the guy in second could see who was beating him. And a little bit embarrassed to say I had Budgie in the front of my helmet, which was my nickname when I was a little boy because I had a little purple bike, I think a little rally bike, which was called a Budgie bike. So that was my nickname for the first few years of my racing career.
Budgie? There's a good chance that he might regret saying that. By the end of the season, the world title still swung in the balance. Coulthard had been unable to get back on level terms after Australia, despite some fine performances. But the team's effort all went behind the driver with the most points, as it must. And Coulthard found himself cast in a supporting role in the season his fans expected him to be challenging for the crown in person. But he's young, well under 30, with a lot of driving still to do and a good chance of laying his own hands on the driver's title before he even has to think about what he'll do when he hangs up his helmet.
After motor racing, I hope very much that I can be within racing in some way for a long time. You know, after Formula One, I'd like to try IndyCar, hopefully with Mercedes as well, and just see how successful I can be there. And then after racing, I just want to have a normal life, you know, have family, friends, and just be happy, because you only have one life. So I want to spend my life enjoying myself, not working like crazy every day.
This season has been difficult for Coulthard, and while Häkkinen bids for the driver's crown, DC looks like a man who has survived 4 years in the toughest arena of them all and remained at peace with himself. No small achievement. Flavio Briatore was possibly the most flamboyant team manager the sport has seen since Cesare Fiorio, maybe more so. His departure might have left even a team as well established as Benetton reeling, were it not for the fact that his place was taken by David Richards. Already responsible for the success of Pro Drives, Richards was clearly relishing the prospect of getting to grips with the brand new challenge of the Formula One pit lane.
Coming into a Formula One organisation was a complete sort of change, at least that was the way it was projected. As it's happened, it's turned out to be not as radical as I thought, and I spent most of the year just sort of starting to understand, to listen. I made a very conscious decision that I wasn't going to make any radical steps. I wasn't going to sort of air my views at an early stage. I just needed to get one season under my belt to understand what was going on. And I believe that I've achieved that. I think that I've learned what I needed to, and I think I'm very clear in my thoughts now where we go from here.
Benetton has an established background of success. It's not just the World Championships with Schumacher, but the fact that it has finished in the top 3 of the Manufacturers' Championship every year. It's a tall order, asking a new manager to maintain that record of success with 2 young drivers.
Starting the year with 2 young drivers, there was a lot of potential there, and everybody knew that in Fisichella and Burt. Nick Worth, his first full design of a car. A lot of solid elements that we knew as well. And then some other new ones, the Bridgestone tyres, for instance. We moved to Bridgestone very late in the day, alongside McLaren. And the early part of the season proved some great results. And I think ahead of expectations of most people. We were challenging regularly at the front, on the podium, a number of occasions, right the way through to mid-season.
Always a believer in long-term projects, Richards knows the intrinsic value of deploying cutting-edge technology. Giving drivers in any formula the best car they can ask for is the best way to help them win.
Well, I think if you went back over the last 10 years of history of Formula One, you would soon realize that the World Championship drivers are very special people. There's no denying they are the top drivers in the world. But the reality is the constructors have made the world champions. And if you look at where the champions have come from, they've come from the best car and the best team of the time.
This year, Formula One said goodbye Goodyear, the tyre supplier whose products were first used in 1959, but weren't specifically designed for sport. The official programme didn't begin until 1964, and their first race was on Richie Ginther's Honda at Monaco in 1965. Ginther scored his fourth point at the next race in Belgium, and in Mexico at the end of the season, Goodyear, Honda and Ginther took their first Grand Prix wins together. In '66, Jack Brabham became Goodyear's first world champion, followed by Denny Hume, Jackie Stewart, Nicky Lauda and Emerson Fittipaldi. Ronnie Peterson brought GP win number 50 at Monaco in 1974, 4 years after the introduction of slicks. Win number 100 came in '77, and in '78 Goodyear introduced radial tyres at the British Grand Prix. 5 years later came win 150 in Canada with René Arnoux at the wheel of the Ferrari 126. By the time of win 200, it was Gerhard Berger driving Ferrari's F187, and as Prost and Senna traded titles, it was Senna who gave Goodyear its 250th victory. Win number 300 came with Hill and Williams in Spain in '94. And since then, drivers like Schumacher and Villeneuve have added to a tally that now stands at 370 wins and 25 world champions. The Tyrrell name first appeared as a constructor in 1970 on the 001, in which Jackie Stewart scored a perfect set of DNFs at the last 3 races of the year, Canada, America and Mexico. The following year, with 6 wins out of 11 races, he and Tyrrell were world champions. They were runners-up in '72, and they won the title together for a second time in 1973. 38 years later, Ken Tyrrell presided over the launch of the 026, the very last car to bear his name after selling his team to the newly formed British American Racing. That pair of world championships with Stewart, plus a season of glory in the late 80s with a DFV against the turbos, and a revolutionary 6-wheeler which won the Swedish Grand Prix in 1976, are the high spots in Tyrrell history, perhaps along with Harvey Postlethwaite's anhedral front wing on the 018 and John O'Lacey's stunning drives in a car that seemed to have been built just for him. Now, the Ockham factory has closed its doors, and those staff who haven't gone to BAR will move on to other pastures. This really is the end of an era. Ken Tyrrell was the last of the gentleman racers, his eponymous team the final reminder that this over-commercialised business used to be a sport.
I think it's always been fun, and the only reason that we've been in it is because we find it fun, and we are very fortunate in that we've been able to earn our living doing the job that we like doing.
The final drama in the 1998 season is once again a title battle at the final round, the third time in as many years it's happened, and yet again Michael Schumacher plays a pivotal role in its outcome. This year, his protagonist throughout the season was Mika Hakkinen, a driver who matured so much during the year that Eddie Irvine's remark that the real battle for the driver's crown was between Adrian Newey and Michael Schumacher no longer holds true. But even a Hakkinen win could detract nothing from the Schumacher legend. And this season has seen most pit lane pundits share the same opinion, with heart and head evenly divided.
I've always had this feeling that if there's any justice in the world, the best car wins the constructors' title, and there can be little doubt this year that the best car is the McLaren, and the most talented driver wins the driver's title. And I think there'd be little disputing, in spite of the occasional races of Hakkinen that shows great inspiration, that Schumacher is without doubt currently the best driver in the world.